Cheaters in Star Citizen, How It Happened, and What CAG Will Do About It by Hybrid V Audio. I don't want anyone to think that I'm highly critical of the person that made the video. I am not. It's a much better video than I could ever make. I tried to make one. It was dog shit. And I ceased on that action because, well, this is a much better video, although it still misrepresents the problem a little bit, which is why I want to sort of react to it. I am a bit drunk. I have finished, well, about to finish, one bottle of wine. I don't even know what that wine is, honestly. And I don't care. We'll see. The reaction video should be easy enough. And I have already pre-watched the video. That has prompted me to respond to it, sort of. And I mostly agree with the video. It's just some details that I do not agree with. So let's get into it. Give me some fucking quality first, eh? Should do.
Welcome, pilots. My name is Hybrid V, and I want to talk about cheating in Star Citizen because, oh boy, it is really taken off since this free fly went live. For some reason, cheating just exploded, or at least that's what it seems like. Especially if you visit Spectrum, Reddit, or even YouTube, you'll see a lot of footage of what people are doing in terms of cheating in the game. And I want to talk about yours. And the reason why Star Citizen is seeing cheating now is mostly because it's a free fly, so it's easier for someone to just make a bunk account that's going to get banned anyway, cheat and have some fun, and then at the end of the day, just have that account get thrown away because it's going to get banned.
That is absolutely true, and that's actually the core of the problem, I would say, but we will get to it a little further in the video, because the real solution to cheating kind of ties into that problem. He will talk about some other stuff and I will comment on it, but that is the biggest issue actually. So let's continue.
Potentially we may see a wipe, but we've seen also before in the past when they've clamped down on dupers, all they do is they just take the items away from players who have purchased from dupers or taken items from dupers, and of course also purged duper inventories as well.
One thing I'm wondering about is, does CAG have tools necessary to easily and efficiently trace those items, to know that this was one person going through a couple of accounts to get that item onto their main account and banning that main account? If people can just create a new account, they will create sacrificial accounts, they will wash the items of any guild, because you can't really punish a person that bought an item off of a random account, right? They didn't know it was duped or, hacked into, well, not hacked into, but acquired using cheats, right? So you can't really punish them, but you can't let them keep the item either. So it's a bit of a problem. Yeah.
But the other type of cheating I want to talk about, the one that's more widely reported than anything else, is the cheaters that can do instant kills, steal inventory items from players while they're still alive, and even teleport themselves into other players' ships and steal them. And these are the most...
Not even that. They can steal your inventory items, like the stuff that you can't normally take. Backpacks, armor, weapons you are currently using, even at a distance. They don't even have to be close by or anything like that, which leads me to believe that the game isn't exactly server authoritative. However, he argues differently, so let's just continue.
So one of the most common issues that people are reporting is, for example, let's say they're at a spaceport or something like that, and then their items go missing. And it's because someone essentially just looted it from their character, despite the fact that they're not dead or downed or anything like that. And I've been seeing some players out there improperly attributing this to the server taking the client's word for it. This is not at all true. You'll know this is not true because anytime you've ever been messing with the inventory, what was the most annoying issues that you would always see? Inventory delays or even inventory rubber banding, right? Have you ever had that issue where you try to put on, say, a med pen or a multi-tool on your hip only for it to teleport back into your inventory and you're constantly fighting trying to put it back in? Yeah, that's the server going, hang on, give me a sec. I got a lot of information to process here. I don't really accept your action here, so I'm going to put that back into the inventory.
And that's my first issue with the video. I am one of those people that thinks that the game is not server authoritative. It is currently client authoritative. And the fact that you see the rubber banding in inventory is most likely not the server telling your client that this action shouldn't happen. It's more likely that the client that you're using, your game, doesn't receive a confirmation that the action was successful, which is a very important distinction. Because if I want to loot, for example, an item that I shouldn't be able to loot off of a player, let's say his armor or weapons, that's insured, you shouldn't be able to loot that item. Okay, if I loot it, instead of having the server respond, you can't do that, what you actually get is no response at all. And why I think that is because if you just close and open your inventory again, it refreshes and suddenly all actions work perfectly well. For a while, obviously. You have a connection to the server, there's the inventory thread, you move an item, the inventory thread accepts it, sends a message to your client that, yeah, the action was successful, it's all good. At that point, your game moves the item on your screen. It's nice. But what I think happens with the inventory thread, it either freezes or becomes, for whatever reason, unresponsive. So you move an item, and since your game doesn't see a message that the action was successful in a certain period of time, it moves the item back on your screen so you can try again. But I believe you actually lost the connection to that piece of software, right? And if you close and open the inventory again, or wait for it to refresh, then it starts to work again perfectly fine. So I don't think that is actually server being authoritative in that instance.
And usually it takes a couple of tries before it lets it work itself out. This is part of server validation. If it was always taking the client's word for it, we wouldn't have these inventory issues. They would never, ever show up. You would always be able to take items so seamlessly and smoothly, and you would never have these delays.
That, and I don't want to rag on the person that made this video, no. But from my point of view, it doesn't seem like it. Because if it was part of the server validation, then you wouldn't really have that issue because it's not an illegal move. It's not like an unauthorized action or anything. It would happen, maybe with a delay, but it would happen. But after your inventory stops working, when you can't move your items, it only starts to work again after it either refreshes itself, or if you close and open the inventory again to enforce a refresh. So I don't think that's what's happening.
One of them is that there could be some poor validation. There could be flaws with the validation or flaws with the logic that are supposed to handle that. And of course, this cheat maker has to find those flaws. And it could take them weeks, if not months of work trying to figure out what those flaws are and how to.
I completely disagree with that. From my experience, it takes maybe a week for people to figure out how the client works. They pretty much never even attempt to figure out how the server works. It's, well, first of all, it's kind of pointless most of the time because you can't really hack into the servers, not because it's impossible. It's more of a risk-reward thing. Because if you hack a client, then it's a bit of a gray area. They can't really prove that much. They can sue you for damages, for example, stuff like that. But they can't really prove that you hacked anything because you hacked it on your own machine. You own it. You own the memory, everything within it, stuff like that. None of those cheat developers would actually risk trying to reverse engineer a server, which is already illegal, or hack a server, which is super illegal, and actually carries real repercussions, unless you're in countries like Russia, China, or wherever. They don't try to do that most of the time. Like, cheat developers usually go with the easiest way to do things. and figuring out how the server works, most of the time it's not that easy. It's much easier to just hack the client, which means that most of the time what they do is just hack the client, and whatever is possible with the cheats is possible by hacking the client. That's why I think the game is currently client authoritative. And I've seen some comments that were saying that the game used to be server authoritative, but they have turned off the servers, forcing the server state onto the clients. That's another thing. No game is fully server authoritative, except for maybe like League of Legends, stuff like that, but most games are a bit of a mix, where the more important stuff is server validated and it's server authoritative, whereas the less important stuff is client authoritative, and depending on the tick rate of the game, there is some interpolation going on as well, which we will come back to later when we're further into the video.
Look at a game, for example, like PlanetSide 2. That is a server-side authoritative game as well, and there are still numerous aimbot hackers and fly hackers in that game. Obviously, they're few and...
That's my second issue, and one of the biggest ones. Even if the game is completely server authoritative, 100%, everything gets to calculated on the servers, and you just receive the info to display on your screen, even then, aimbots will still work. Fly hacks, not as much. Fly hacks could be prevented by server authoritative games. I didn't really play PlanetSide 2, but if PlanetSide 2 is very much server authoritative and people are still using fly hacks, which is one of the easier things to prevent, they're probably abusing the fact that you're in water, so they try to trick the game to think that you're in water, for example, so you can move up and down in 3 dimensions, unlike when you're on the ground. That's, for example, how we did it in Arcade. If you wanted to get to 3D in Arcade, you would just raise the water level to be able to swim in the air on your client, and the game was sending a message to the server that he's in the water. The checks were very bad, so it worked. It's probably that kind of behavior here. Aimbot, however, you can't beat it. It will always work. That's because the server doesn't actually calculate how you move your mouse around. That's literally done on your client and then sent to the server as your X and Y axis. Where are you looking at, right? So, well, not axis, X and Y angles. The server has nothing to do with that. That's literally done solely on your client, even in a completely server authoritative game. You can't block an aimbot by having a server authoritative game. It's literally impossible, because the way it works is you read your own memory, your own RAM memory that belongs to that process of the game. You read where the position of the player is, where it is in the game space, and you aim for that, either writing values to the memory, or if you're lazy, you can simply mimic the mouse input in Windows API or API and use it that way. It's slightly less accurate, but it still works if calibrated properly for a certain resolution. It's Mickeys and shit like that. You don't really care about that. But the server has nothing to do with it. Absolutely nothing. It just goes to show you how little of an understanding how cheats work most people have. I feel like there is a huge gap in knowledge when it comes to how client and server interacts, what's done on the client, what's done on the server, what is possible and what isn't when it comes to general audience of pretty much any game. I've seen posts on Spectrum, or people mostly talking in chat, and they think that CAG can just click one button and all the hackers would be gone. It doesn't work like that. It's a much more complex and much harder problem to solve than most people realize, even people that have some knowledge realize.
I talked to a few engineers who are good friends of mine, and they were kind of able to explain in their field how this type of stuff works. And really what it boils down to is it's complicated, but I'll do the best I can to kind of explain in layman's terms how this type of stuff works, but I also don't want to overcomplicate it and make this video too long. I do want you to at least have something to take away and understand how these core concepts kind of work. And then, you have a better understanding, not just of how it works in Star Citizen for anti-cheat features, but also how it works in other games as well. So first and foremost, server-side validation, as we previously mentioned here, is something that's very common in most modern multiplayer games. And what it really...
It's not as common as most people think. A lot of games are very client authoritative. For example, Arma 2, if anyone played DayZ and encountered a hacker, that hacker could spawn a building on top of your head. Same happens in GTA 4 Online, and that's because those games are client authoritative. In Arma, it's because your client is part of a server. What server does in Arma is mostly connect people together, but the game is running on all the PCs at once, sort of. So pretty much everyone is kind of an admin if you can abuse the system. In GTA 5 Online, I don't know how it works, but I know that hackers could do pretty much anything. It's most likely a very client authoritative game as well. The server just doesn't check for stuff, right?
It means is the server validates all critical actions such as player movement, damage, inventory changes, and all that. The authority is on...
I don't think it does all of those things. It does some of those things, that's for sure, but not all of those things.
Now, clients still require data, for example, like an entity's position for rendering purposes. So, for example, there's a thing called culling. Culling is when something is taken out of the game from the client's perspective in order to save, let's say, resources like for rendering. So, for example, a ship that's all the way at a moon that you're not at, they may not even render on your PC because you don't need to know that information, right? But a player that's around the corner from you will...
Culling is something that occurs on your client. So your client already has that information. For example, if there's someone that doesn't have to be rendered because he is behind 7 walls, you can save on performance by not rendering him in a rastering process, but that information is still in your memory, which means if you have an ESP wallhack kind of cheat, you can still render him if you want to. It's nothing to do with the server. Some games, some hyper-competitive games specifically, may choose, I think Counter-Strike does that, maybe Valorant does that, where the server doesn't even send you information about other players that shouldn't be visible to you unless they are very close to a corner to become visible to you. And that's to sort of mitigate the power of ESP or wallhack to make sure that people can't see other people through 3 or 4 walls. But they can't really tune that very finely. They still have to start sending you information about other people when they're even close to a corner, not when they're actually visible, because that would create a very visible picker's advantage. But it does happen in some hyper-competitive games. Thing is, you require a lot of performance for that. You need high tick rate servers, which Star Citizen does not have, and most likely will never have, as it seems that the game is moving more into an MMO direction instead of 10-on-10 arena combat. Like Counter-Strike can do it, or Valorant can do it. I mean, Counter-Strike has 10 players on a map. That's it, right? You can't do that with 200 players.
Games could opt to still cull the player that's on the other side of the door, but the problem is if that player decides to rapidly move around the corner, you could experience issues where a player is invisible for a very split second before they render in. And I think CIG does do this for NPCs, but I don't think they do it for players. I'm not 100% certain, but in my own playtesting and experience with the game over many years now, I think that they do that a lot for NPCs, but they don't necessarily do that for players. Now, this is the type of stuff that, for example, ESP cheaters... ESP stands for Enhanced Sensory Perception. What that means is cheaters that can basically see through walls and stuff like that, they can exploit that at a fundamental level for a lot of games. And it's not just that they can just exploit them because they're very easy to exploit, but also because there's a whole lot of memory checks and stuff like that that govern this type of stuff. And I'm kind of already getting into the weeds on this, but let me just state that ESP is one of the most common hacks that you'll see in a lot of multiplayer games, simply because it's very easy to tap into like memory and stuff like that, and to identify in the renderer, like what type of information is around a corner essentially, or through a couple walls and whatnot. So
that is true. Wallhack or ESP is one of the easier cheats to use without getting caught. The only things you have to really avoid is looking straight at the player through a wall or keeping them in the corner of your vision at all times. And you can pretty much avoid a ban in most games doing that. And it still gives you a huge advantage if you're at least half decent at the game. That advantage is really insane, right? Just like, for example, in Counter-Strike, again, just knowing where people are, you don't even need a wallhack. What I did when I developed my cheat, I did a minimap hack, where players were just shown on the minimap, not in the 3D space. That way I didn't even run the risk of looking at them through a wall, but I still knew where they are in space around me, which gives a huge advantage if you're at least half decent at the game. You don't even have to be that good.
Now, even in games with really strong validation systems, that logic for those validations can still fail for many different types of game actions, such as those game actions being incomplete or just having unfinished code, or they lack edge case checks and stuff like that. There's a whole bunch of different issues that could lead to that.
Personally, I have no idea what he means by that. That sentence doesn't actually carry any information with it. I don't know what he means, honestly.
Now, successful multiplayer security treats clients fundamentally as untrusted. And this is actually what you...
It should. Not always does.
How many times have you played with your friends and you see them do really funny stuff, like they'll ice skate on the ground or they'll rubber band and do all kinds of weird stuff, and everybody looks at them and goes, oh my god, this game has got some issues, right? But at the end of the day, that is server validation that you're seeing.
That's my third issue. It's actually most likely not server validation that causes this. You can notice that rubber banding also in games like Battlefield or even World of Warcraft. It's most likely the interpolation or prediction or simulation of someone's movement. The Star Citizen server runs at 20 Hertz on a good day. If there's a free flight week, there are more players online, whatever, it starts to run about usually 7 Hertz. If you had to update someone's position that's moving in front of you only 7 times a second, that would give you an update every 142 milliseconds. Not a very good player experience. You would probably start to notice stutter and people teleporting a bit. What is actually happening in this case is you move left, but the server doesn't update often enough, so your game simulates what happens in between. And then once the server updates, it corrects itself and simulates from that point on. Let's say you move first to the left and then immediately start going to the right. You will send information that you move to the left. Another client will get that information, like your friend, and you will start simulating their movement to the left to smooth it out so it looks good. And then after a certain period of time, when the server updates your information again, because of low tick rate, and even when the game is running well, it's still low tick rate. I mean, 20 is fucking trash, let's be honest. Turns out he's all the way to the right. So he will rubber band, he will suddenly teleport. And it's very visible in this game. And you can also notice it in games like World of Warcraft and plenty of other MMOs, because MMOs usually run on lower tick rate than FPS games. Star Citizen, being a mix of the two, will have issues solving that, but yeah, that's a problem that CIG has to tackle.
Remember that when you're running around, you probably don't notice how your character's moving around. You feel like relatively smooth as you move around, right? Whether you're jumping over objects and running around, it feels generally smooth. You don't notice rubber banding on your end, but if your friend's watching you, they will probably notice rubber banding on their end when you...
And that's further proof that movement is not server authoritative. Because what happens in a server authoritative game, if you move around and you're lagging or the server has very low tick rate or whatever, you as a person would notice it on your client, like on Battlefield, for example. There was a huge rubber banding issue. you as a person while playing the game would move back to update with the server.
This is a visible example of the game trying its best to recorrect the position that you're seeing of that player. Obviously, there can be other factors that can occur as well there, such as low.
If it corrects the position of other players, why doesn't it correct the position of your own character?
How do any of these types of exploits get past the initial validation checks? And more importantly, how does it get past easy anti-cheat? I mean, we have...
They don't get through the validation of the server because there's probably not much of it to begin with. And the way they get through easy anti-cheat is actually very simple. There's plenty of games that use easy anti-cheat, but the cheat developers have already found ways to circumvent that. I know a person that develops bespoke cheats, so not very public. There's like one or two person using a specific cheat. Whenever they first tackled easy anti-cheat using online resources, it took them about a week to circumvent that. Easy anti-cheat is not the answer. It will essentially only stop like very basic script kiddie level of hacking. Anyone who does this job professionally will get through it with no issue at all.
If you decide as a developer to strengthen your server-side validations, it's going to consume additional CPU and memory overhead. Think about it. How many times have you played in the PTU? What's the number one thing you notice when you play in the PTU? Probably the most that you know.
That is absolutely correct. And that's one of the problems that Star Citizen will have. Generally speaking, it's not a war you can simply win against cheat developers. Problem is, you cannot have a game of this scale that's 100% server authoritative. League of Legends, that's 10 players. Counter-Strike, that's 10 players. Valorant, I don't remember if they're teams of 4 or 5, but that's like what, 8, 10 players at most. Again, you can do that on small scale, but you can't scale that system into hundreds of players on a single server. It's literally impossible.
If you decide as a developer to strengthen your server-side validations, it's going to consume additional CPU and memory overhead. Think about it. How many times have you played in the PTU? What's the number one thing you notice when you play in the PTU? Probably the most that you notice is performance is worse in the PTU than it is in live. And this is because there's...
Again, he talks about server-side validation and server-side CPU overhead, which I completely agree with. You simply don't have the performance to have a completely server-authoritative games of the scale of Star Citizen, or any MMO for that matter, unless you reduce tick rate drastically. And even then, like, World of Warcraft is one of the examples that is very server-authoritative, and the tick rate is very low. And on top of that, they have much less variables to be calculated than in a 3D space game as compared to World of Warcraft. So there's that. That FPS doesn't mean anything in this discussion. What he should be highlighting is the server FPS.
There's a lot more debugger logging going on in the background that is taking more CPU cycles. This lowers your overall...
That debugger is client side. It has nothing to do with the server. It may send information to the server, but what he's talking about is a client side debugger to gather more information to fix issues easier that may occur on the more unstable build of the PTU.
Now imagine these type of almost debugging validation checks happening on every single minute action that is happening in the universe. Yeah, you can imagine the CPU...
Exactly. If you wanted Star Citizen to be a completely server authoritative game, you would need to calculate everything. All movement, inventory changes, everything they look at, what they're supposed to be able to see, stuff like that. So it's a lot of like path tracing, which is similar to ray tracing, just more CPU bound, let's just say, for every player on the server. It's literally impossible to do. And even if CAG somehow pulls a rabbit out of the ass like a magician, that still wouldn't help with wall hacks and aimbots. Those will work just fine, no problem.
let's say you have 50 players jumping into an 890 jump into the center room, atrium, or whatever, and then you have one player who decides to throw a grenade in it. Well, now the server has to identify, was that player capable of actually throwing the grenade? They were. Cool. All right, let's let the grenade land. All right, now let's see. Are all these players within the radius capable of taking damage? It will check all these players and it will validate and it will identify whether these players are able to take damage from this legitimate source. That's a lot of checks, validate.
It's even more than he describes. Like the server would have to calculate every bounce of the grenade off of a wall or any other surface like the ground. It will have to validate if those players should take damage through path tracing, for example, if they're behind a wall or any other cover, let's say maybe other player covering them. I don't know how detailed Star Citizen wants to be. The trajectory of the grenade. There's a huge amount of calculations that would have to be done that are physics-based on top of that, and that's for every player on the server. Absolutely agree with that.
We're seeing instances where the game is allowing illegitimate damage to kill other players. And this can be not because it's trusting the client necessarily, but because that client could potentially be sending what are known as forged packets. A cheat maker may spend weeks, if not months, sniffing the packets that players send to the game's server, identifying what packets control what, and then try to spend some time trying to forge their own packets. And they essentially send false data to the server. They're able to replicate that, send it to the server goes, okay, this seems legitimate, and then they allow them to do that. So for example, a player...
That's an example of a client authoritative game, first of all. Secondly, and more importantly actually, is no, they don't have to sniff the packets. The packets are encrypted, and if you have access to the game and how the game works, it's kind of pointless to decrypt the packets and sniff them, because the packets are created by the game itself. Most people probably don't know, but most ESP or wallhack cheats actually use the game inbuilt functions like world to screen, which is a function that determines where to display on the screen a thing that exists somewhere in the world of the game, position-wise. They use that to display the ESP. Like, the cheat developers are using the parts of the game that are responsible for rendering for their own purposes. And you can do the same with packets. The advantage of it is you can look at the packets before they are even encrypted. You don't have to sniff the packets or decrypt the packets. You can simply control how they are made. Because if you circumvent easy anti-cheat and you get to inject into the game, you get to use any part of the game that exists for your own purposes, including the part of the game that creates the packets that are sent to the server. And considering the fact that there is a thing called Star Citizen SDK generator on Unknown Cheats forum, that means they can probably get to that quite easily.
You could say, I have a size 10 bomb next to me, spawn it next to me. Here's the data packets to validate that. They send it, the server goes, this seems legit, okay, cool. And then they will oblige the player, and then the player can use that to kill a bunch of players in an area, right? How that is still considered technically legit within the game's logic.
Not exactly. If the game was server authoritative, the game wouldn't trust those packets. What it would do is check the packet that it got and the information that it got in the packet from the game client, from a certain player, and check it against its own calculations of what could happen and determine that it wouldn't be possible. Because if you want to spawn a bomb, let's say, well, the bomb has to be spawned out of some aircraft, right? It can't just spawn out of thin air, and that would have been caught, unless they don't check for that, which would make it client authoritative.
So what could you do to prevent something like that? Obviously, you could strengthen validation checks even more at the cost of performance, but you could also use an anti-cheat software like Easy Anti-Cheat. No. Anti-cheat software works alongside server-side validation to ensure there's no hanky-panky from the client or anything like that. Unfortunately, it also costs additional performance whenever you use an anti-cheat software. That's just by nature how it works. Anything that hooks into the game is going to potentially have a parasitic loss on your performance.
Yes, but it's not that big of a loss. The bigger problem here is you can circumvent easy anti-cheat to a point where it doesn't matter if it even exists. I mean, what you have to understand that cheat developers do this thing for a living, and they make very, very good money on it. So they are very motivated, they are extremely talented, they have decades of experience at this point, and they are paid extremely good money for what they are doing. So they are very good at their job, which is to circumvent anti-cheats. Once you do that, you get to do whatever you want with the client. So the only way to prevent that is for the server to not trust the client at all, which, as we discussed before, is impossible on a scale of Star Citizen, which means they will be able to do some things, maybe not all of the things, but at least some of the things, even after the game is much tighter when it comes to preventing cheats. So some cheats will always exist.
Wait, Hybrid, we have Easy Anti-Cheat that starts every time we start the game. How come Easy Anti-Cheat isn't doing anything about these other players? The reason for that is because Easy Anti-Cheat is only starting when you first start the game. All it does is it checks driver validation, and it also makes sure there's no suspicious programs open by the time you start playing the game. After that, it doesn't do anything else. It doesn't do any additional checks. All the additional validation checks are completely turned off by CIG. Now you may...
If that's true, that is wild. That is absolutely wild. And honestly, I'm willing to believe that at face value. It makes sense. However, even if it wasn't the case, it wouldn't be that big of a problem for cheat developers anyway. They have circumvented easy anti-cheat in games that implement it very well, and it doesn't really matter. It's not an obstacle anymore.
Ask yourself, why in the world would they do that? Think about it from a developer's perspective. You're in a development environment that is still actively ongoing. Anytime you want something like Easy Anti-Cheat or BattlEye or any of these other anti-cheat makers to actually protect your game, you have to send them a build that has to be validated. If you have tight deadlines, it could be really, really challenging trying to meet those deadlines because you have to wait for those builds to get validated. On top of that, there's of course performance considerations. Like I just said, once you have something running in the background that's constantly checking things, it does add to CPU and memory load, which is significant for a game that's already struggling with performance as it is now. And currently, with how Star Citizen is just on full burner right now with all the builds that they're coming out with, active development does require frequent updates, which means that EAC's build signing and validation can be time-consuming and disruptive to the development process.
I agree. To implement an easy anti-cheat or any other anti-cheat like BattlEye or whatever properly, you kind of need the game to be at least almost finished, because it is going to work with variables that are in the game, but if those aren't ready or subject to change in the future, that would create essentially double work. You would have to implement your anti-cheat solution, and whenever there are changes, you would have to do that again.
This is extremely common in a lot of games. This is a common cat and mouse thing that is very, very well documented within not just games, but also system security in general. These are very, very simple topics I'm broaching here, and I could get even further if I wanted to, but I would be getting in the weeds, and of course, I am not a network engineer, nor do I do anything that has to do with network security in any type of video game or anything like that. I am a simple sound designer / audio engineer. That is my expertise. However, I did speak to a few experts who were able to break it down in layman's terms for me, and then I just took what they told me, and I'm essentially kind of regurgitating that in a more digestible format.
And honestly, I'm completely fine with that. That's still a decent enough explanation for most people. I also disagree with people that completely rag on CIG for not curbing that issue early on. It would be literally a waste of resources right now, and it's not exactly possible to get rid of all of the cheaters anyway. Let's be honest, this is a better video than I could ever make, honestly. I agree that CIG cannot really do anything about it right now. They can mitigate the issue, but they can't get rid of the issue completely, and they will never actually do that because it's impossible. Cheat development and anti-cheat development, it's a cat and mouse game, as he said. cheat developers usually get to make the first move. It's much easier to be on the offensive than the defensive side of things.
Now, I know inevitably somebody's going to go, yeah, well, this is an example of CIG's incompetence. They're not willing to take the necessary steps to strengthen the game ahead of time.
It's an impossible problem to solve because you can't really prevent people from cheating at all. The best way you can do it is make people not want to cheat. But if they want to cheat, they will, and you cannot stop them. It's impossible.
If you did indeed enjoy this video, please leave a like, as it really does help out the channel. And of course, if you didn't like this video and you actually disagree with me, leave a dislike down below as well to let me know what you really think about me and my opinions when it comes to this stuff. And of course, if you want to support the work that I do here going forward, consider becoming a channel member like these fine folks right here, whose contributions help me out immensely when it comes to putting videos like this together for you all. But until next time, fly safe, keep those thrusters hot, and I'll see you all in the black.